Matthew, to the regret of some, to America, has won our NBC Happy Hour League Championship.
I was the best team from start to finish, from wire to wire. I lost only one game this entire year.
Our Happy Hour League last year, these were the standings. And
5-9.
Matthew's nifty team, I don't think there's another Matthew in our league. I don't know where this screenshot came from, but this was quite the Cinderella run.
Yes.
From 8th place to champion the following year, Matthew.
Yeah, you know what? Last year I'd never played on Yahoo before, and so there was some. No, I'm dead serious.
Fantasy Football Happy Hour with Matthew Berry, served by Applebee's.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Happy Hour Draft Day Manifesto.
Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, Draft Day Manifesto. I want to get back to the opening clip right there. I just want to.
It's a tough
So
scene.
here's
when you went 5-9?
Yeah, well, because here I want to.
Finished
So
eighth?
a lot of people are like, what's the name of the league? The show league, the Fantasy Football Happy Hour League, and I'll tell you what it is. It's called the League of Assholes, and I'll tell you why. It's the League of Assholes, and I'm happy to be the champion of the League of Assholes because that clip right there, where Connor Rogers, I don't know what's going on with my collar here, but that clip right there. Where Connor and Jay, I have won the league, right? I am the champion of all. I am your master. You guys are my bitches, right? I've completely decimated the entire team, like the squad. Stupid Dev tried to pick up every tight end, didn't work. The fact of the matter is start to finish, wire to wire, I was their champion, better than them, have the proof. And you know what they do? In the clip that is supposed to be celebrating me, stupid producer Pete, finds from last year, from the year before, where I'd had some injuries and I had some issues during the draft. I did have legit issues during the draft just because I was not familiar with the platform. Whatever. The fact of the matter is like, you couldn't just give me my roses. You couldn't give me one day to just be like, you know what, Barry? Honestly, you talk a lot of trash, but you walk the walk. You talk the talk, but you also walk the walk. You backed it all up. You beat us down like a drum. You crushed us like a grape. You are a champion. Congratulations. You couldn't just say that. You couldn't just give me some roses, a little bit of love. No. You got to bring up 2 years ago. Like, we didn't bring up your miserable teams. Like, you know what? Like, that's why I am stuck in a league of assholes. And I'm now determined. I was going to take it easy on you guys this year, but now I'm going to beat you guys again like a grape. I'm going to crush you. I'm going to break your spirits. I cannot wait. I haven't decided. I haven't figured out what pick I want. Maybe I'm
Beaten like a grape.
What does that mean?
I'm going to crush you like a grape.
Okay.
Crush you like a grape. Beat you to a pulp.
Yeah.
Make you question your own manhood.
I question my own manhood all the time.
Yeah,
anyway.
there you go. It's going to go more.
Fantasy football.
I'm just going to let you know. That's fine. Let's get to the Draft Day Manifesto.
good. You need
But I
more
don't want to
motivation.
share any of the tips with you. You
We have
a-holes.
to. It's part of the show today. The manifesto is
energy.
out now. As always,
outrageous.
it's free at NBCSports.com. Today we'll give you a preview of that with the 7 habits of highly effective drafters. Matthew did not follow these year 1. He got himself together in year 2 and followed his own 7 habits, and you see the results, as well as some of our favorite offensive player of the year bets later.
Outrageous.
Let's dive into
Pete
the
is
habits.
so bitter because
It's well done by Pete.
No, it's not well done by
It's good
Pete.
research.
Screw Pete.
That's good pre-production.
Pete's like our backup producer too. Like Pete's not even like a
third string,
He's
but-
like he's barely in the league.
Adam
He's
gets
barely
more
in the
reps
show.
than him
He's
these
barely in the league.
days.
I'm not convinced Pete makes the league this year.
It's
we
gonna
have
be
a few.
close.
The show has gotten bigger. We've gotten more people involved. Pete's on the fence.
The plan?
Listen.
Yeah, he was originally in, but now seeing that clip again, it's got me all fired up. Pete's on the fence.
Listen, for
Just so
anyone,
you know, Pete, you're on the
anyone
fence.
who doesn't know, playing fantasy with Matthew is the guy that you don't want in your league because he just looks at everyone who is not the man in the mirror when something goes wrong. Complaining about the settings. Didn't know that it was super flex. Complaining about like getting screwed on waivers. Waivers is a very,
Championship
very
week, by the way.
Yeah.
We've been doing waivers for 20 weeks.
Yeah, Jawan Johnson.
Yeah,
is
what-
ringing in my ears. Okay.
I could get into that, but I'm not gonna. Yeah, I'm just gonna get people in trouble.
revisit
I'm
it
not
at
gonna
some
do that. I'll revisit this.
Stop the draft.
Stop the draft.
That was the best moment. When you tried to stop the draft, asking Damien to stop the draft with 1 second left on the clock, as though Damien
it's
is
like-
God. As though Damien is like Jim Carrey.
Damien is the commissioner, but then like him and Steven, like they combined on the settings and what Damien told me what the settings were, and then what Steven actually set the league at, completely different things.
Who played God in Bruce Almighty? It wasn't Jim Carrey.
It was-
Morgan
anyways.
Freeman.
but
Don't get me started.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that last year, finally familiar with the Yahoo platform, finally understanding what all the rules were, I was able to, crush you guys like a grape. Yeah, when it was like an even playing field, you guys lost poorly. They lost badly, Michael Thomas over here. Like, for the love of God.
So we can catch up this year. Habit number 1.
Yeah.
Study your league rules,
right.
format,
This is
and
true.
scoring. If this
Yeah.
is your first time playing on that platform, you especially want to pay attention to this one. So at the
1000%.
end of the year, you don't say, I've never played on Yahoo before, even though I basically invented fantasy football.
I worked at ESPN for 15 years. I'm a company man.
That's
Everyone
fair.
knows this. Everyone knows this. Everyone knows this. So, yeah, I mean, just being honest, never played on a platform before. But I don't like to lie to my audience. You know what I mean? I'm not like you, Connor. Like, whatever.
No
but
shame.
here's what I will say. Yes, you should absolutely understand. Like, what I would recommend also is, by the way, is that if you have a commissioner, don't trust your commissioner, because that's what I did. Is I was like, Damien told me, like, oh, this is what the settings are, and I didn't actually. And I'll own this. I did not look at the settings. I just I trusted what was told to me.
Habit number 1, not practice.
Yeah. No, look. So but don't be like me in this particular case, in the instance from 2 years ago. What you want to do is figure out, in all seriousness, figure out exactly what your league format is. It's not just as simple as like, oh, it's 12 teams and it's PPR. Like, understand every nuance of your league, right? For, again, like just simple nuance between PPR or half PPR, right? Last 2 years, 88% of the running backs that finished top 12 in points per game in PPR scoring had a target share of at least 10%. Like, you're not getting just a pure touchdown guy. Like, you want somebody that catches passes, PPR. That's sort of obvious. But, like, is it a one quarterback league or a super flex league? Do you have IR spots? Because if you have an IR spot, then, you can take a little bit more chances with highly productive but injury-prone players. Do you have a short bench? If you have a short bench, you want more solid players. So it's like every nuance. How many teams make the playoffs? If you're in a 14-team league and 8 teams make the playoffs, okay, I can take some more chances right? But if you're in a 14-team league and 4 teams make the chances, 4 teams make the playoffs, like it's all, every single thing in terms of constructing your roster, you have to know, like, when's the trade deadline? Are there keepers? Like, every single nuance you have to look into kind of the nook and cranny, right?
Yeah, and probably more pressing now than ever, because I feel like leagues now have become more convoluted, has a negative connotation, but there's just more random scoring quirks. Like, I was talking to a buddy who's in a league where interceptions only count for -1 and passing touchdowns are at like a ridiculous premium where it's like +8 or something.
It's a quarterback premium, basically, at that point.
So you just need to understand exactly what you're drafting for, and don't just blindly take Christian McCaffrey #1 without understanding what you're actually drafting.
Yeah, like honestly, like ESPN's default is 2 running backs and 2 wide receivers, right? Yahoo, like 3 wide receivers, right? And so, like, that makes a difference in terms of the depth of the position, like in terms of what's your normal starting lineup? Do you have flexes? Like, and by the way, is your IR spot only for people that are on the IR? Some leagues allow you to put like somebody that's out for COVID or somebody that's suspended for a non-football reason on the IR spot. Other leagues do not. And so again, like in a league where I could put a suspended player in an IR spot, you feel better about Rashee Rice.
Yep, Jordan Addison.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, so that's kind of that's sort of the thought here. Like, again, in a league with an IR spot, like you feel better about drafting a Jalen Warren, a DeAndre Hopkins,
any
right?
of these guys,
any of these guys, right?
Yeah.
That may start the season on injured, and so you're just like, okay, like we know that these guys are going to be productive when they play. But this gives you an extra roster spot because what happens is as soon as the draft is over, boom, you take DeAndre Hopkins, if he's still out, or Jalen Warren's a better example because he's definitely going to miss the first game of the season. Boom, you throw him on IR. Now you immediately have an extra roster spot between the draft and when the season starts.
Yeah, I think, a little bit of a tangent, but also just understanding the specific nature of what the injury is and timelines and the likelihood of a suspension as well. All of that, I think people get so turned off by just looking at, Jordan Addison might be suspended. Well, have you actually looked at what's the actual likelihood? Because Rashee Rice, people just don't want to deal with Rashee Rice. Well, if you do want to deal with Rashee Rice, there's a pretty good chance he doesn't get suspended and he's going to be the #1 wide receiver for the best quarterback in NFL history.
Yeah,
possibly.
and back to your point about players that are dealing with whether it's off-the-field issues or anything like that, those are NA spots. So be very aware of if you're dealing with IR spots, you could take any guys that are actually hurt. An NA spot, you could take guys that have other issues as well. But there's a key difference there.
Right. The other big thing here is, I think this is something that doesn't get discussed nearly enough in fantasy football, is average draft position. So when you're in the draft room on a platform, Yahoo, ESPN, Sleeper, My Fantasy League, wherever you're playing, CBS, wherever, NFL, right, wherever you play, is that the average draft position infuses the draft room. And that draft room, that ADP, the average draft position, massively influences where people get drafted. You're in that draft room, the clock's kicking down, it's a minute, and yeah, sometimes you might be like, hey, stop the draft. But what happens is if you're in a league of assholes like I am, no, we're going to move on.
Auto draft.
So exactly. So then you get stuck on auto draft. What happens is the clock's ticking down, and people just like, oh, the top of the guy. Yeah. So just give an example here. So we looked at the ADP of players going on ESPN and Yahoo, and just look at some of these massive differences. The fact that I can get Kyler Murray 3 rounds later on ESPN is massive, right? The fact that Raheem Mostert is going 4 to 5 rounds later on ESPN is really interesting, right? As you just sort of see that, right? Trying to find if there's somebody that's going later on Yahoo as we look there,
Calvin Ridley's a big one.
Yeah, Calvin Ridley is a big one. Knowing that you could get Calvin Ridley 2.5 rounds later on Yahoo than ESPN. Again, as you sort of look at this, what you can do is you can sort of arbitrage this and realize Kyler Murray is a guy that I really like. My love-hate list comes out on Thursday. Kyler's going to be on the love list. I have him ranked higher than consensus out there. But again, I know that if I really like Kyler Murray this year, and I really do, it's going to be easier for me to get him on ESPN in the 9th round than it is in the 5th or 6th on Yahoo. Knowing that I could get Kyler Murray in the 8th or 9th round on ESPN changes how I approach a draft on ESPN versus if I want Kyler, I'm going to have to draft him earlier on Yahoo.
Yep. I also think it's relevant to the real top of the draft and choosing where you select, because a lot of leagues do that now as a draft to choose your selection. And I was talking about a buddy with this last night about how he wants to choose to pick 6th because he wants, of the top 4 wide receivers, he just wants whoever is left. But on Yahoo and ESPN right now, Breece Hall and Bijan, they're going 4th and 5th. So if you select 6th, you're very likely going to get one of those top 4 wide receivers, whereas on Sleeper, Justin Jefferson is going 4th, on ESPN he's going 8th. So just understanding the top of the draft and where you select is important.
And to that end, mock draft like crazy. Just practice your settings. I will say, I'll put out a plug here, but it's legit. At Fantasy Life, we have this partnership with NBC, just got announced officially today, which is great. Fantasy Life Plus, when you buy Fantasy Life Plus, you also get the Roto World Draft Guide. Awesome. But the other thing you get is you get access to the Fantasy Life Draft Champion. And in the Draft Champion, what you can do is you can literally sync your league and import all your settings and practice against everyone, and also choose different kinds of, hey, I want to go 0 RB. I want to go hero RB. I want to punt tight end. I want to go QB late. Whatever it is you want to do, there's all these different draft strategies you can try, and you can assign them to everyone else because you might go, oh, you know what? I'm in a league with Connor, and I know Connor always likes the rookies, right? So, and I'm picking 6th, and he's picking 5th. So you know what? I'm gonna mock draft against somebody in the 5th that is rookie heavy. And so it's completely customizable to not only your league settings, but the drafters you're playing against. And so, and you can use I'm going to draft on Yahoo. So you import Yahoo ADP. Here's the league rules that we're using. Here's the kind of people I'm going to be drafting against. I know I'm drafting from the 5th spot. And then you just practice, and practice makes perfect. It's an unbelievable tool. We spent a year building it, the Draft Champion on fantasylife.com. But anyway, in partnership with NBC Sports, NBCSports.com/fantasylife or fantasylife.com. Check it out.
And I think that plays into habit number 2, which is identify the relative depth at every position as we talk about the differences in ADP. For instance, Matthew, let's take a look at the quarterback depth and how that can range versus ranks. And Yahoo ADP, of course, where you're playing will factor where these guys ultimately go.
Yeah, and obviously these are all 1 quarterback leagues. If you're in a Superflex, they're not going this late unless you're in a Superflex league with Penn State Blake. Who
did not follow habit number 1.
No, did not
the
follow
format and the rules
right,
of the league.
Whatever. But didn't get thrown under the bus like I did, producer Pete. I might put. You know what I might do? Even though Penn State Blake doesn't even work anymore, I might put Penn State Blake in the league and kick Pete out. I'm thinking about that. That's on the list right now.
Ultimate revenge.
All right, but quarterback depth. Let's get into this. My point is that here are some guys that I like more than where they're going. So I can look at Yahoo ADP. I really like Jaden Daniels, and I think that ranking's going to come up when my rankings update comes out. Or Trevor Lawrence. I have Trevor Lawrence as QB 14. He's not going until QB 18 on Yahoo. You're in a deeper league, a 2-quarterback league or Superflex league. Cousins and Stafford, even though they are pocket passers, and obviously I really want kind of mobile quarterbacks. those guys are really good values. Again, Cousins and Stafford not being drafted inside the top 20 of quarterbacks, I think, is kind of insane because both those offenses are going to be really, really good, and they're going to be pass heavy and pass friendly. So just understanding, go to your point about the ADP, just realizing whatever set of ranks you use, whether you use mine, whether you use somebody else's, you do your own. Compare those ranks, especially to the ABT, the average draft position on the site that you're drafting at, and then you can also you can arbitrage against that as well. The other big thing about quarterback, so this is habit number 2 of the, in terms of our draft day manifesto, the 7 habits of highly effective drafters, as we've talked about. Habit number 2: identify the relative depth at every position, and your priority this year, as many years, mobile quarterbacks, they're at a very simple level. The path for like C.J. Stroud is awesome, right? But the path for C.J. Stroud to justify his draft position, he's going to have to throw 40 touchdowns. Now, he possibly could. He's that good, right? And they've got those receivers. But somebody like Jalen Hurts, who last year did not have I don't think Jalen Hurts had a great NFL year, but because he got so many of those rushing touchdowns, so many of those cheap tush pushes, he was a great fantasy quarterback. Again, whether it's rushing touchdowns or whether it's just rushing quarterbacks, the fact of the matter is it just keeps your floor high, and it's different ways to get fantasy points. So, those guys, the Lamar Jacksons, the Kyler Murrays of the world. It's why Jaden Daniels, I have him significantly higher than where he's going, and when my new rankings update comes out, he'll be in my top 10.
Right, because if you assume, say, 50 yards out of Jaden Daniels, you're getting that extra touchdown built in just to what he does as a runner, and he's going to run. That is why he was drafted number 2 overall, not just the explosive passing, but the running. So I actually think that ceiling for Jaden Daniels is higher, and I know you said you've even moved him up, with the way we're going to see him used this year in the red zone too.
Kyler Murray's been a top 10 fantasy quarterback every year he's been in the NFL, and he's not had a bunch of great weapons around him. But again, super fast, runs like hell. I mean, and so anyway, I want a mobile quarterback this year because there's just more paths to fantasy glory than there is. If you're a pocket passer, if you're Joe Burrow, you're C.J. Stroud, you have to throw 35 to 40 touchdowns. You have to throw well over 4,000 yards to compete with some of these mobile quarterbacks.
Yep, and if you don't get one of those guys, I just wouldn't bother reaching for, Dak Prescott right now is going as QB9. Geno Smith, who gets to throw to DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and JSN, and what should be a pretty progressive passing offense, he's going QB 27. 2 years ago, Geno Smith, and they were in similar offenses 2 years ago in terms of their weapons, Geno Smith had a better year than Dak Prescott. So why am I going to pay for Dak at QB9 when I can get Geno Smith at QB 27? I get even Trevor Lawrence around QB 19, 20. So I just wouldn't pay up for those pocket passes in that kind of 9 to 13 range, thinking about as well to Jared Goff, that ilk, even if we think they're going to have good years.
I would rather Goff. I'm worried. I wouldn't want to bypass Dak Prescott all the way down to Geno. I mean, I think there's some concerns with Geno.
No, but it's just relative to what else you can get at running back or wide receiver in that range.
I do agree that if you're gonna, I'll say this, I'd prefer Dak at cost to a C.J. Stroud.
Me too. I would say the same for Jordan Love and Burrow.
1,000%.
It's the same combo.
1,000%. Or Jared Goff. Jared Goff is going in the QB 15 range, and again, as we've talked about, 14. He's playing only 3 games outdoors this entire season. Now you may have to make an adjustment as we get to the playoffs because 2 of those games are in the fantasy playoffs. But still, Jared Goff's going to have a very good year and not cost you anything.
So this is habit number 2: identify the relative depth at every position. Let's do that for the running back group here, Jay. And we have the top 10 coming off the board in about the first 22-ish picks as we see them right here.
Yep, and obviously the nature of running back is that there is more attrition at this position. Generally, a running back is going to miss around 2.0 games per season, whereas a wide receiver is half of that, and so that attrition gets baked in, and that's why I think that we talk about how you can mainly lose your draft in the first round as opposed to win it, and that's why I think there is the preference for wide receivers at the top of the draft. At the same time, I think this class is particularly compelling because McCaffrey's going number 1 as he should. He's Christian McCaffrey, but Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson, I think those are absolutely potential league winners, and there are worlds where we go into next year and one of those 2 guys is being taken first.
Oh, so you see here, these are where the top 10 running backs are going on Yahoo. 10 of the first 20 picks on Yahoo, basically, are running backs. This is higher than I have them in the overall ranks. Having said that, though, depending on where you're drafting, depending on who falls to you, I'm okay doing that because so many of the higher ranked wide receivers for me are going later. So again, this is about mock drafting and understanding where you can get players and especially the site that you're playing on, because you can do stuff like that. You're like, okay, like Nico, because these running backs are going higher than I would take them, but the fact of the matter is whoa, like I have Nico Collins at 17. I can get him at 34 or pick 35. Malik Nabers I have him inside as a top 30 overall player. He's going outside the top 65 on Yahoo, right? I mean, Deontay Johnson's going to catch every pass in Carolina. They're going to feed him in a big way. Rasheed Rice, I have him at 40. He's going outside the top 90. Again, to your point, Jay, I don't think he gets suspended this year. I think that case gets kicked. I think if we see a suspension for Rice, I think it happens in 2025. But again, just understanding where all the players are going, understanding the relative depth of the position. I think you want an elite wide receiver, but on Yahoo specifically, you can wait longer than I would somewhere else on another site, because they're going honestly much later than I would think. The other thing is, Connor, as we talk about this, and we've seen this for years, rookie wide receivers especially, Rasheed Rice is a great example, takes them a little while to acclimate to the league. Not everyone is Jamar Chase right out of the gate, but once they acclimate to the league, often over the second half of the year, they become factors down the stretch.
Yeah, we saw massive moments from Jaden Reed when you talk about another wide receiver that's really, kind of figured it out in the later half or the middle half of the season.
Jordan Addison last year.
Jordan Addison is another guy. We saw JSN getting more factored, in weeks towards the end of the season. So when you're taking wide receivers, especially in your keeper league, and take one at the end and see where it goes.
Puka Nacua, of course, is
that was a little tougher to
standard,
yeah,
right? But the point is like, yes, it's especially later in your draft, like those rookie wide receivers, especially ones that were reasonably highly drafted.
They might need more time. They might need an injury. They might just need a little bit more. But the second half of the season, you could be starting them in your flex every single week as a very viable option. And this, another spot, guys, here where the depth is so important to understand is tight end, because it's so different this year, Matthew. For so many years, it felt like, Kelsey's going to be the guy, and then we have this wide open pool. And this year, the wide open pool kind of starts at 1 and goes all the way, maybe even to 5, where it starts with Sam Laporta, but all the way that stretch to Dalton Kincaid.
Yeah. So I think. Used to be Kelsey was a first or second round pick because not only was he so good, he was so much better than everyone else. But to your point there, first I have Sam Laporta at number 1, but just look at the overall rank there. So I have Laporta at 37. I have my number 4 ranked tight end, Mark Andrews, at 46 overall. So less than 10 spots separate the top 4 tight ends. You got Dalton Kincaid, another 10 after that, Kittle as well. Like, I think you definitely want a tight end that's on this screen. Because I will say that, unlike previous years where there was like a couple of guys that were really good and then there were all these sleepers that you're like, one of these guys will pop. I feel really good about the guys on this screen right here, 1 through 10. And for people that are just listening, Laporta, Kelsey, McBride, Andrews, Kincaid, Kittle at 6, Evan Ingram at 7, Jake Ferguson at 8, Kyle Pitts at 9, and David Njoku at 10. I feel really good about all those guys having, fantasy production this year. I don't love a lot of the sleepers. There's a couple guys that I like,
right.
Could have Noah Fant pop this year.
See what Bowers could do.
Chigga Okonkwo is, I do think Tennessee's going to be a much more.
You always get chiggy with it.
I do get chiggy with it. I do love my Chigga Okonkwo. But generally speaking, like, I think you want an elite tight end this year. But I think I would much rather have Trey McBride or Mark Andrews in the 4th, 5th round than Laporta in the 2nd, 3rd, because again, there's not a bunch of difference between the top 4 tight ends, and honestly, I think Kincaid has a big year as well.
Habit number 3, maybe one of the more simple but important ones here, Matthew. What's most likely to happen? For example, Josh Allen has finished as a top 2 fantasy quarterback in 4 straight seasons. So kind of walk through your thought process with this one.
I honestly think, and I don't know if it's because fantasy analysts are all just trying to out-impress each other. And that, and it's one of those things that you sit there, the games are over on Monday night, and then you've got until next Thursday. And so fantasy managers, we all just tinker and think and think and think. But honestly, I think decision-making becomes way too complicated a lot of times in fantasy. And honestly, look, none of us can predict the future. You're just, so we're all playing the odds, right? This is something Jay does with his betting all the time as well. You're just playing the odds. What's most likely to happen? And the example you gave, exactly, Josh Allen. Josh Allen has been a top 2 fantasy quarterback each of the last 4 years. What's most likely to happen? There's a chance that he completely falls off the face of the earth. There's a chance that he gets injured. There's always but what's most likely to happen is that at the end of the year, Josh Allen is a top 2 fantasy quarterback, right? I'll give you another example, right? Okay, Arizona. Arizona selected Marvin Harrison Jr. with a number 4 overall pick, okay? Since 2010, there have been 6 wide receivers drafted inside the top 5. 4 of those 5 wide receivers, all right? Or sorry, 5 of those 6 wide receivers. 6 wide receivers drafted inside the top 10 since 2010. And 5 of them saw at least 115 targets in their rookie season. The Cardinals do not currently have a wide receiver on the roster with a career target share above 15%. So what's most likely to happen?
Fire up Marvin Harrison Jr.
Maybe Marvin Harrison falls on his MHJ falls on his face, but chances are he's going to get a gazillion targets from one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL on a team that's likely going to be trailing. All right, so you just sort of see there. Last 6 wide receivers drafted, top 5 overall. I mean, even Justin Blackman got 132 targets.
That stands out.
Right? And by the way, and the other thing on Corey Davis is people forget about this on Corey Davis. Corey Davis was hurt the entire preseason, had a hamstring injury, didn't really get into the game, Tennessee, until like midway through the season. So that sort of skewed. Corey Davis had a really tough rookie year for the Titans. But again, generally speaking, if you're a highly drafted wide receiver, you get pep, especially like inside the top 5. You're going to get a ton of targets. Marvin Harrison Jr., you're going to get a ton of targets. All right. How about Derrick Henry, right? Derrick Henry's led the NFL in rush attempts in 4 of the past 5 seasons. He has 6 straight years, Jay, with at least 1,000 yards from scrimmage and double-digit rushing touchdowns. Since Lamar Jackson became the starting quarterback in 2019, Baltimore running backs are averaging a league-high 4.8 yards per carry. So what's most likely to happen? Could King Henry fall off a cliff? Sure. Could he get injured? Sure. But again, this is somebody that has led the league in rushing attempts, going to a team that has led the NFL in yards per carry. What's most likely to happen? Derrick Henry's going to get a ton of rushing attempts on a very good offense and get a lot of scoring opportunities. Again, he has scored double-digit touchdowns now in 5 straight years, right? So
on Henry as well.
6 straight years.
I think a big thing with Henry too is that Baltimore, for whatever reason, they don't use Lamar at the goal line as a runner. At least they didn't last season in the first year of that offense.
When you've got $250 million invested in a guy, you don't need to throw him into the a 350-pound defensive tackle.
Yep. Right. So they had 33 carries inside the 5 last year. Running backs got 28 of them. And Lamar only got 5, and Lamar only had 11 pass attempts as well. So when they get in there, and my sense in that is that you're kind of saving Lamar for 4th down, and it's like, can we just punch it in one of these 3 downs because the threat of Lamar is so dynamic. So I think that Henry is the favorite to lead the NFL in rushing touchdowns for a reason.
All I was going to say is that those are 3 examples here, but I think the bigger point here is very simply is like as you approach every decision, who to draft, who to start, who to sit, who to trade. Every decision you make in fantasy football, specifically for the draft, but honestly throughout the season, just ask yourself, what's most likely to happen? Doesn't mean it will. The chips aren't always going to fall your way. Doesn't always happen for me. Sometimes you have a 5-9 season. It is what it is. But then you come back the next year and you crush everyone and you bring it up on national TV for a year. What I'm going to say here, though, is you just look at the decision and just sort of like what's most likely to happen. And you try to do some research to justify your answer. But Zamir White, again, as we talked about, Zamir White is a day 3 pick who doesn't really have a pass catching profile, who has some competition in the backfield, and is being highly drafted. What's most likely to happen?
He's going to disappoint you at
He's
cost.
going to disappoint you at ADP.
Yeah.
Again, he might be great, but just when you think about the competition, the lack of a pedigree, the lack of dimension to his game, he's a north-south guy. That's what he is. And so, he's going to need volume, and does he get that volume? What's most likely to happen? What's most likely to happen, doesn't mean it will, is that he'll disappoint at ADP.
Yeah.
So,
specifically on Zamir White, he's going in the exact same range as James Conner. James Conner last year was 3rd in rushing yards per game and plays in a sneakily very dynamic offense, I think. So I'd much rather James Conner at cost.
Very quickly before we move on to point 4, that's the thing is the other thing about running back depth that I'll just talk about that we didn't have time to, but you were right. Like James Conner, Joe Mixon's another guy that people are just leaving for dead. And you get later into the rounds like Devin Singletary. We talked about him yesterday. Again, there's a handful of running backs that are not sexy. They don't play for great games, but you know what? They are cheap volume. And we talked about this last year as well. James Conner was a guy like that last year, as was David Montgomery last year, as was Isaiah Pacheco last year. There are these running backs that are going in the 4 to 8 and sometimes like 9th and 10th round that are just going to get massive volume. No one's excited about Joe Mixon, but you're going to look up at the end of the year, and he's going to be one of the league leaders in rushing attempts.
Habit number 4, really interesting one, an important one to understand. Use rankings flexibly and in context. So, for example, Matthew, the breakdown of a Christian Kirk versus George Pickens, they might look similar in rankings, but a story of 2 different seasons.
Yeah, and it's also about so first off, rankings are merely a guide. Once you get into the draft and you start building your team, like I do rankings for a living. I live, eat, breathe them. I don't always follow my own rankings because of the dynamics of the draft. Or I'll be like, oh, you know what? It says I should take a quarterback here, but honestly, the 3 guys that are picking after me, they all have quarterbacks. They're not doing it. I can wait another round because it's going to come back around on all the guys that I want. Or you sort of look at different tiers and you're like, there's only 4 guys until I pick next, and there's 6 wide receivers in the same tier. I'm good with whoever comes back to me. Like, again, so rankings are fluid, but specific to Kirk versus George Pickens, I think this is a very good example, right? So I have Christian Kirk at wide receiver 30. I have George Pickens at wide receiver 32. Basically a coin flip, right? And so I go to fantasylife.com, and I look at my buddy Dwayne McFarland's projections. He has Christian Kirk for 223 points, George Pickens for 222.6 points. So, I mean, they're basically projected for the same. But here's the and by the way, last year, Christian Kirk finished as wide receiver 33. George Pickens finished as wide receiver 36. So you're like, oh, they're the same play. Absolutely not. Christian Kirk scored at least 12.9 fantasy points in 73% of his full games. He had only 1 game, however, with more than 19 points. Christian Kirk was a floor play, consistent production, basically week in, week out, averaged about, 13 fantasy points per game. Meanwhile, George Pickens, he scored below 10 points in almost 60% of his games. He had single-digit fantasy points in 59% of his games. However, Pickens also had 4 different games with 20 or more points, including games he had a 35-point game, he had a 28-point game, and so you look at that. And my point is that they're basically the exact same player from a end of the season projection in terms of also what they did last year in terms of total fantasy points, but as you construct your roster and you're at that point in the draft, do I want upside? Do I want a guy that's going to boom or bust? Or do I want a guy that's going to basically give me this kind of production? And that suddenly depends on what the rest of your wide receiver room looks like. If you already have 3 or 4 guys that you feel really good about, and you're like, oh, let me just take a shot on George Pickens, who might break out as being the only guy in Pittsburgh and another year there, maybe eventually gets a connection with Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, okay, fine. But if you went running back heavy and maybe you did a tight end and a quarterback early, and you're like, I need production. I need locked-in production. Well, then you're going with Christian Kirk. Again, not all rankings are created equal. Understand that it's fluid, and as you go through your draft, adjust the rankings in your own mind. Be comfortable picking somebody lower on a list or reaching for a guy based on how you're constructing your roster and how the rest of the draft is going. All
right. Fantasy football just got better this season.
Yeah,
$1 million better.
$1 million.
Create or join a private Yahoo Fantasy League and enter the $1 million NBC sweepstakes. Plus, earn extra entries to win when players on your roster score a touchdown during an opening weekend game that's on NBC or Peacock. Yeah. Download the redesigned Yahoo Fantasy app or go to NBCSports.com/fantasymillion.
NBC has 3 games opening weekend. We have Ravens Chiefs on Thursday night. We have Packers Eagles from Brazil exclusively on Peacock Friday night, and then we have Rams Lions on Sunday night. And so 6 great fantasy teams. Any player on one of those teams that scores a touchdown in opening weekend, if they're on your Yahoo Fantasy team, you got a shot to win $1 million. Not you, Jay.
No, man.
Not you, Connor.
Not me
we
either.
work for NBC.
No, not allowed.
But you watching at home, you could win $1 million.
You duped us.
But what we can do is when
buy
we're
us
back,
something if you do, though.
Draft Day Manifesto continues, habits 5 through 7 right after this. The Roto World Draft Guide is here for you during the peak of draft season, and this year it has added features available exclusively through a new partnership with Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. Get a Fantasy Life Plus subscription and receive the Roto World Draft Guide to help you crush your competition like a grape. Use promo code ROTO10 for 10% off and unlock extensive fantasy, DFS, and betting tools now. Go to NBCSports.com/fantasylife to learn more. Habit number 5, fellas. Focus on winning weeks.
Yeah.
Matthew, target players with upside and ones that you will know when you should actually start them.
That's the big thing. I think people forget this, but fantasy football is not a season-long endeavor. It is a weekly contest that takes place over the course of a season, right? You know, a lot of times you see analysis, and we do this as well. You're like, well, he was wide receiver 16 last year, or you know, from week 8 on, he was the 3rd best running back in fantasy. The truth of the matter is that all you're trying to do is put together winning weeks. You're trying to just fantasy football, season-long fantasy football, specifically, unless you're in a guillotine league, where in a guillotine league you're just trying not to finish last every week. But in a season-long head-to-head fantasy football league, you're literally just trying to beat whoever you're playing that week. Okay. So you're trying to assemble a roster of players that will be better than the team you're playing. Super simple, right? But the fact of the matter is that when you're on draft day, like you are not going to draft unless you get very lucky. You are not going to draft a team that you will be able to start every single week. There's going to be injuries. There's going to be buys. There's going to be people that disappoint. So as you look to your bench, you want guys that have huge upside. Like I used to call this the never James White rule. Right, in the standard size, right? So James White, for a number of years, was a running back with the Patriots, who was a nice pass-catching running back, who was like kind of like 8 to 10 points every single week. Like, you know, he was like 4 for 40. Like that was a typical James White line. You know, 5 for 36, whatever it was, right? He would just catch a couple passes. So, which is fine. And every year he would finish as like running back 25 or 27, you know, that kind of, so he was fine. But there was literally no upside there. But then you think about guys last year who like, Kyren Williams is obviously an amazing example, but you know there were guys last year that like, where when the starter went down, and the backup was going to play, and you knew that guy was going to be worth starting like that season, right? You know, trying to think of a really good example here, but like. All right, he didn't perform great, but like when Aaron Jones goes out, okay, A.J. Dillon, right? And A.J. Dillon disappointed. But if ever there was a week to start A.J. Dillon, it's when, you know, Aaron Jones, was out. Like Khalil
Alexander Madison behind Dalvin Cook was a thing
was
for a
always
long
for
time.
years. Yep. But Khalil Herbert's a great example, right? You know, because it was like very crowded backfield in Chicago. Honestly, the entire Bears backfield, right? Because like when Roshan Johnson and D'Onta Foreman were out, like you're like, okay, I'm starting Khalil Herbert, and he was great. Right? And then there were a couple times when those guys were hurt, but D'Onta Foreman was getting the start, and he got all the work. So the point is, it's not just about having players that have big games, but knowing when to start them, right? That's a big key because sometimes you get these big random games where you're like, I didn't know this was the 1 week that Juju Smith-Schuster was going to catch 7 balls for 100 yards. So I think there are guys out there that I want to highlight that I do think have this opportunity. Like, at a bigger level, Jonathan Brooks, when he becomes healthy, he's going to usurp Chuba Hubbard. Chase Brown looks like he's going to be the starter in Cincinnati.
Might have already done it. Yep.
But Zach Moss is starting him. If anything happens to Kyren Williams, and Kyren Williams has missed 5 games every year he's been in the NFL, Blake Corum's going to be the starting running back of a very good offense. Same with Zach Charbonnet behind Ken Walker, who has been banged up in college, banged up since he comes into the NFL, or even Ty Chandler. Aaron Jones obviously missed a lot of time last year. They like Ty Chandler in Minnesota. And with Sam Darnold under center, they may go more run heavy this year anyway. Who are some other running backs that you really like, Connor? Some rookies that have an opportunity as well?
Well, I think in the second half of the year, I'd like to see when he gets healthy. We've talked about Tyrone Tracy just because that backfield is so wide open. I'll say this. I look at Braylon Allen. He went into spring, and that was busy, right? They took Izzy Abonaconda 2 years ago. They took Isaiah Davis right after Braylon Allen this year, and it was him right away as the number 2. Like, it didn't take very long. Breece Hall, we love Breece Hall. We can't wait to see what Breece Hall does. But running backs get hurt. They get hurt. If you're paying that kind of investment, a top 5 pick for a running back, you better take Braylon Allen later in the draft to have that insurance. And Braylon Allen is good now. He just needs to play, but he needs Breece Hall to
If something were to happen to Breece Hall, Braylon Allen's a top 10 fantasy running back.
Exactly.
I'll say Jordan Mason. I think Jordan Mason is the clear backup. Everything you hear out of San Francisco about Elijah Mitchell just doesn't seem like great vibes. I feel like if anything were to happen to McCaffrey, it would be Jordan Mason, who has run very, very well. And again, we've known this when McCaffrey's missed out, whoever's behind him for the Niners, that's somebody. Ray Davis, I think he's going to have a role in Buffalo, And again, if something were to happen to James Cook, suddenly Ray Davis becomes really interesting.
Tyler Algier as well.
Always.
Just because
Yes.
with Bijan, like the one thing we know about running backs, the more you touch the ball, the more opportunity you have to get hurt. Bijan is going to be among the league leaders in touches, which means that he just is an injury risk by the nature of playing at that position. And we know that Tyler Algier has been good and effective when he gets run.
Generally speaking, backups usually are around, running backs, but there are some cases in terms of whether it's wide receivers or I think about Isaiah Likely. If anything happens to Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely is a tight end 1 for the Ravens, and I think he's going to have a bigger role this year anyway. They really like him there in Baltimore. But my point is that when you're drafting, you just draft somebody that, like, they may only be good for 3 weeks, but those 3 weeks they can win you the week, as opposed to when you're drafting late, you want to draft for upside, not some guy that's going to get you 10 points.
Yep.
You don't need, you don't need Braxton Berrios.
Habit 6, be adaptable and trust yourself, Matthew. You never know what to expect during the draft, so don't get tied to one specific strategy.
Yeah, I generally thinking, like, hopefully if you're watching this show and you've been reading me and you've been reading other people and you've listened to other shows, what have you, you have a general opinion. You don't need to do all the research that we do. Like, this is why we do it for you. You guys have a life. We don't. But, and I'm specifically speaking about me. And Connor, to an extent. But what I would say here is that just having a general opinion on every player. And I never like going into a draft with specific or an auction with a specific strategy. I'm definitely going RB. I'm definitely, I'm coming out of there with Josh Allen. I'm definitely, I want to make sure I get one of the top 3 tight ends. Because value happens at various places within an auction or a draft. And so the fact of the matter is just going being fluid and understanding sort of, I'm in on this player, I don't like this player. And I understand kind of basic, I like this player, but not before the 6th round. Have just a general sense of every player so that when you go into a draft and weird stuff happens, all of a sudden there's a crazy tight end run. For whatever reason, some guy in your league decides to take 3 tight ends or 3 quarterbacks in the first 6 rounds. And you're like, whatever it is, that you can adapt and you understand. You're just constructing the best roster possible, because I think when you go into a draft saying, I'm definitely doing this, that's when you get screwed.
When you look at the top of this draft, what is a strategy that you go in with and how it can necessarily change? Say you're picking 6th in our draft, and you always talk about, hey, that wide receiver pool. If Justin Jefferson falls to me, that's just the value. But say the panic button hits and everything's gone. Like, what is an adapting mode to you in this year that you notice?
Yeah, I think in most drafts I'll go in wanting one of those top 4 wide receivers, just whoever comes last. But at the same time, like, if I need to pivot and they're gone, and then it's not like I'm just going to reach for A.J. Brown because I need a wide receiver. At that point, I'm just going to take Bijan Robinson or Breece Hall. I think that you have to be able to, you can come in with an idea where I'll normally go wide receiver first, then try and get Jonathan Taylor as the running back going around in the 2nd round. But if you have to pivot and you have to go Bijan or Breece and then get a wide receiver coming back, then that's just what you have to do.
I'm in this league called the Going Deep League that Mike Clay, my friend and former colleague from ESPN, Mike Clay put together, and it's like this crazy deep league where you start up to 3 tight ends, up to 7 wide receivers, up to 4 running backs, up to 2 quarterbacks. It's tight end premium, super flex, and there's only a 3-man bench. So it's like you have to start everyone. But the point is that it's tight end premium. And I didn't go into that draft expecting to go back-to-back tight ends, but it's like a 12-team league, and where I was picking like super flex, so I got Mahomes. Like at 3, and then when it came back around, I was just like, all right, I'm going to stack him with Kelsey because he was the best available. It's tight end premium. You got 1.5 points per reception for tight end reception as opposed to normal PPR. And then by the time it came back around, like the next best available player on my list was Trey McBride. Like, I didn't go in thinking my first 3 picks were going to be quarterback and 2 tight ends, but based on the scoring of that system and the way that draft developed, I thought those were the best available. I was like, okay, we're rolling with this. I'm going to try to beat these guys with 2 elite tight ends and the best quarterback in football.
Habit number 7, the draft is just
third
the
in that league
first step to success, Matthew. We know it's a long season. That's why we do this show. You guys are here 6 days a week. I'm here 5 days a week. A lot of leagues are won on waivers.
They really are, Connor, and that's the other thing. I think that, so there's 2 points to this particular topic. Number one is, again, the example I just gave, I'm totally fine going into the season being able to start 2 of the top 4 tight ends in a tight end premium league, but the other thing it did is it gives me a trade chip, right? Because now if as the draft goes on, I'm like, wow, I really needed another wide receiver. When you have to start 7, they go quick, right? Or it gives me a trade chip. Like, you don't always have to chase. Like, okay, now I have a premium tight end that if I need to trade Kelsey or McBride in this league, I'm going to be able to, and I'm going to get a good return for it, and I'm still left with an elite tight end. So understand that when the team that you leave the draft with doesn't necessarily mean that's the team you're locked into. We're building a house, and this is the floor, right? This is the basement, the blueprint, if you will. And so when you're in the draft, if you find yourself on the wrong end of the run, don't just grab, whatever, to your point, don't just grab A.J. Brown because you need, it's a first-round example, but don't just grab like a lame wide receiver because there's been a run and you're like, I'm desperate for a wide receiver. I'd load up another running back and be like, you know what? As soon as the draft is done, I'm going to look around the league and find out who needs a running back and trade some of my running back depth for a wide receiver as opposed to just reaching for a guy here at this point in the draft. And then obviously understand that every team has holes. And so as you go through the season, there will be waivers. And we think about guys last year that weren't drafted that helped people win the leagues. Think about Jordan Love, who was only drafted in 12% of leagues last year, finished as a top 5 fantasy quarterback. Kyren Williams was drafted in less than 5% of leagues, second best running back in fantasy. His teammate, Puka Nacua, 5% drafted, and that was wide receiver 6. Rashee Rice, top 30 wide receiver, under 20% drafted, and Trey McBride was undrafted, and he finishes tight end 8. And honestly, some of those 12%, 4% drafted, because on Yahoo you can draft after the season starts. I bet you when the season started, it was 0 for Puka and Kyren. It wasn't until like we saw their production in week 1 that the people that were drafting after week 1 started to grab it. But my point is that there are always guys that come into the league at all positions that will be this year's Puka and Kyren and McBride and Jordan Love, right? Yep. And so understand that, if you leave your draft and you're like, I missed out here or missed out there, like, it's going to be an ongoing process.
Yep. The other thing I'd say is just study the usage in week 1 really intently. Puka Nacua had 15 targets in week 1 from Matthew Stafford. That means that he is going to be a guy. If Bijan Robinson has 80% of the carries in week 1, if you have Christian McCaffrey, you should try trade him for Bijan Robinson. If Bijan Robinson has 80% of the carries, then he should be the number 1 player in fantasy. Like that kind of stuff that you don't know until you see it and just reacting to what's happening in week 1.
And I will give a quick shout out again to my guy, Dwayne McFarland at Fantasy Life. His utilization report looks at all that stuff. Snaps played, routes run, air yards per target, that just sort of says like, oh, you may not know it, but this guy has a big role and hasn't shown up in the box score yet.
This Thursday, we are hosting our annual Roto World Draft Marathon, including the unveiling of Matthew's Ride or Die on Fantasy Football Happy Hour. That's right,
No
10
pressure.
hours of nonstop draft prep beginning at 11 a.m. Eastern on August 22nd. Check out NBCSports.com/draft marathon for the full schedule. Matthew, Jaden Daniels.
10 hours.
Jaden Daniels.
10 hours.
A ride or die candidate.
He's on the list.
A rookie ride or die candidate.
I have narrowed it down. You start with every player and you narrow it down to a short list. I've got a short list. I've genuinely not decided yet on who the ride or die is.
What's the number of the list?
Probably about 15 at the moment. I've narrowed it down, but Jaden Daniels is on the list.
Okay.
So I've narrowed it down.
What about Royce Freeman?
Not on the list.
What about Todd Collins?
Not on the list.
Okay. What about actually Chris Olave?
On the list.
Ooh.
Jonathan Taylor?
On the list.
Ah, I like JT. That's a kind of
Isaiah Pacheco?
On the list.
Yeah. Bijan Robinson?
Not on
Too
the
early,
list.
right?
Interesting.
Too early.
Too early. Too obvious.
No Breece Hall, no Bijan Robinson.
They have to at least be a second rounder.
Right. That's
Okay.
Again, ride or die isn't about this obscure sleeper. It's always somebody that has some production, but it's somebody that I believe will take the next step this year. Again, it's not like Jalen Hurts or Amon-Ra St. Brown or even Austin Eckler 3 years ago were unknowns. They had production, but I felt like they were being I said to Amon-Ra was one of the best wide receivers in fantasy, and at the time I mentioned it, he was wide receiver 12. Yep. And his ADP ended up
now
shooting
he's a
up
first
after
rounder.
that.
That's
now
the
he's
key.
going 6th overall.
Make the jump.
Right, exactly. Jalen Hurts, when I named him ride or die, he was going as QB 8. Now he's QB, and since then he's been a top 2 fantasy quarterback.
2 more for you. Drake London and James Cook.
James Cook not on the list, Drake London on the list.
Kyler Murray? Did we go through that one?
Kyler Murray's on the list.
Could be.
Luke McCaffrey on the list.
Martavis Bryant's comeback?
Yes, on the list.
Ben
Sinnott on the list.
Ben Sinnott's a sneaky play.
Yeah.
Chris
a real
Cooley.
sneaky play.
Chris Cooley on the list.
We're taking a
Jahan
break.
Dotson on the list.
When we're
Sam
back,
Howell on the list.
Offensive Player of the Year odds coming right up. We'll make our picks. DraftKings Sportsbook is the #1 place to bet touchdowns, and new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Plus, Get 1 month of NFL Plus Premium. Download the app and use promo code BERRY when you sign up. DraftKings Sportsbook, the crown is yours. Let's take a look at the Offensive Player of the Year odds for last call here, courtesy of our friends at DraftKings. Matthew, what do you like on this board right here?
I like last year's ride or die Amon-Ra St. Brown at plus 1,800. Right? Look, first off, the consistency, right? Over 1,500 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns last year. He's one of only 3 wide receivers, him, Tyreek, and CeeDee Lamb last year. 13 games with 6 or more receptions, led all wide receivers. 9 different games with over 100 receiving yards that led all receivers in the NFL. But my point is that if the Lions do what we think the Lions can do this year, it's a team that everyone roots for. Jay, we've talked about this a lot. Offensive Player of the Year, usually quarterback. The award for quarterback is usually MVP.
Yes.
So Offensive Player of the Year is rarely a quarterback.
It's wide receiver or running back.
It's a wide receiver or running back. So here I'm just saying that I think he's going to be the face of the Lions. If the Lions are a team that haven't been really rewarded, in a big way, and so given the fact that they play, as we've talked about, 14 games indoors, like only 3 games outdoors, and Amon-Ra is so good indoors because Goff is so good. I think the narrative of the Lions, and you're going to want to reward the Lions. Everyone likes Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yep, I like that. There's no reason he should be almost double CeeDee Lamb's price. I'm taking Bijan Robinson at 18-1. Last year, it felt like everything went wrong for Bijan, and he still had almost 1,500 scrimmage yards and 8 touchdowns. If he gets last year, running backs for Atlanta had 450 carries. Bump that up to 475 because they should be in better game scripts. If he gets 65% of the carries, which is possible, then all of a sudden, if he's 5 yards per carry, he has more rushing yards last year than Christian McCaffrey, 2K scrimmage yards for a team that I think is going to win that division. And he's Bijan Robinson as well. No one's going to have an issue giving Bijan Robinson Offensive Player of the Year. He's a generational talent.
I'm going to go off the board, guys. Go with Jonathan Taylor, plus 2,800. I think we're in for a massive JT season.
I agree with that.
You've hinted at this, that he's almost a value in the second round when things turn around. Listen, he's healthy. He's ready to roll. He's going to be the identity of this Steichen offense. I understand the fear of Anthony Richardson stealing some touchdowns at the goal line. I think they'd rather Jonathan Taylor punch those in and keep their franchise guy healthy. I just think the workload is going to be insane. I think we're looking at 1,700, 1,800 rushing yards, honestly, for Jonathan Taylor, if he stays healthy.
Again, like Bijan, JT, and Sun God, the lead offensive talent for a team that easily could win their division.
It's all about
volume as well. It means it's closing time. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. For Jay, for Connor, and for former backup producer Pete, I'm merely Matthew Berry. We'll see you tomorrow. Peace out! Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and RotoWorld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest RotoWorld fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.